Hi, everybody. This is so exciting. People want to negotiate. Well, no, let me correct myself. I'm sure most of you don't want to negotiate, but you realize that it's important. And so you're here trying to figure out how to empower yourselves with these really important tools. So I'm very excited about that. Thank you for coming. So everyone can see the PowerPoint slides. Is this correct? I've managed to get this lined up properly. Okay, so I will be sharing these with Lauren, who will share them on with the recording eventually after tonight's session, okay? But I wanted to give a few kind of context things. Actually, no, before I do that, let's do some kind of ground rules, how this will go today. We'll do the main content. If you guys can,
unmute yourselves. Yeah.
Cool. So we're going to go for the main content today, about an hour, 4:30 to 5:30. And then I will linger through 6 o'clock for any additional Q&A. Certainly, if you guys have clarifying questions or in this session, especially, if you hear me say something where you're like, that's never going to happen. I am never going to do that. If you have that going on, I actually want you to say, excuse me, like I want you to raise your hand at that point, not just for clarifying, but if you really feel bodily, like chromosomally, like you cannot handle that, I think it'd be helpful to let me know because it happens all the time and we want to talk through this together. And if I feel like we need to table some of that till a little later, then I'll do that, but go ahead and give me a shot. In that regard, I'm going to let Lauren monitor the chat because the way I have this set up with my screens, I cannot see the chat. So as we did last time, Lauren's going to monitor for questions. And I'd prefer it if you raise questions through putting something in the chat or potentially using the emoji sign to indicate that you have a question. And then Lauren or I will call on you. Okay, so that's kind of the structure. In terms of some kind of background context, right? So this model of negotiating is really standard. It is one that students in professions that are adjacent to social work get trained in very deeply. MBA students, maybe not a helping profession, they get an entire semester class on negotiating. I taught it at Madison. They get 15 weeks where they just talk about and practice negotiating. Other adjacent professions get some of it. Social work doesn't tend to build this in. And yet what we know is that, as my students know, because I talk about it in class whenever I can, that not negotiating or negotiating poorly is one of the greatest remaining explanations for pay gaps, for compensation gaps, right? But in addition to that, this model, I'm gonna take my glasses because my progressives are messing up. This model is also really, really helpful, not just for negotiating for yourself around compensation, but also for negotiating the allocation of all kinds of resources, even like with a friend or a partner going to a movie, but more importantly for your practice, organization to organization or within organization negotiations of a range of types. So you can use this across these different kinds of settings and contexts, but yes, absolutely critical for compensation negotiation. That is, if you're not part of a union, where one of the bonuses of a union is that it's collective negotiation. Like you have people that are at the table bargaining for you who are really expert and really know the details. Absolutely, outside of that kind of context, you got to do it yourself. So you got to know how to do it. The other thing I would say quickly is that we feel like, oh my gosh, social work, calling, we can't do this. This is not team oriented. This is so selfish. What I would say is that in almost all cases, there is what's called a bargaining zone, right? So an employer comes to the table with, it's rare that in every single item, there's only one amount. Usually there's a little bit of squish, right? And then you, in turn, as a prospective employee, also have kind of a range that you want to work with. And if you know Venn diagrams, right, where they kind of overlap, those circles that overlap each other, that is almost always the case in negotiating. And so what this model is about is not trying to steal or make a grab for resources that no one would give you normally. It's rather trying to get into that overlap zone between those two areas, the employer and the employee, in a way that's fair, that is continually motivating to you and you feel appreciated in your job, right? So it's not, that's a really important thing to think about, that there is pretty much always a bargaining zone. And this is about trying to get a reasonable, fair portion of the bargaining zone versus what tends to happen when I've worked with students. I've taught this now for 23 years, I think. And consulted with students, taught social workers, taught alums of my schools, I consulted with them a lot. And what happens is students really think, or negotiators, social work negotiators, think that there isn't something available to them when there is. So this is about trying to simply engage the process so that you can get what's available to you in a fair way. Okay, how am I doing? I can't see one's faces, so.
I said you're doing good.
Yeah. You assume that we're okay. So the other thing too is that this, and we also know that low pay, as much as we have been trained to try to be okay with it or not kind of stress pay as part of our field commitment, it is associated with burnout, with turnover, with leaving the field. We are not doing ourselves and our field, including our clients, any favors by negotiating for our own compensation poorly. And by the way, if you all aren't already employers, most of you are not yet, you'll be on the other side of this. And so part of this message to you is when you're in the position of compensation negotiating as an employer, I hope you keep this in mind and that you don't demonize or pathologize negotiation, but see it as this amazing quality and skill that a prospective employee of yours has, that he's going to bring that to the organization, and someone who is concerned about getting valued for what they do. That should all be good in our field. Okay, and finally, this is like an art as much as it is a science. I will give you a range of different kinds of concepts and terms, but how you engage them, like in a clinical way kind of, is as important as what you know about them. Okay. All right, so here's the agenda. We're going to do elements of negotiation, what the model is. We're going to talk about how you prepare to negotiate. And then we're going to talk about the actual process, like how you negotiate. Okay, and Lauren, you're going to still give me some questions that come up. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I've talked over that slide. Sorry. Okay, so what are the elements? So some of these are kind of obvious, some are less so. So they're the parties. In the case of a compensation negotiation, that is presumably the employee or the prospective employee, ideally, who has a job offer, right? So you're not talking about compensation, you're not negotiating before you have a job offer, right? That's actually a very first insight during our talking about the concepts that I want to bring up. It is brought up by employers who are interviewing all the time. Oh, what did you think? What did you have in mind for salary, right, for this job during the interview, right? At absolutely all costs, you need to not answer that question. If you're an employer, please don't ask it, right? Because until you have an offer, you are at a distinct bargaining disadvantage. They haven't shown their cards that they want you, right? Also, you haven't had the chance to prepare. We're going to have a whole section of this workshop on preparing. You haven't done that yet. You have no business trying to engage in this conversation. So, but you might be asked, so what do you say? Well, what you say is something along the lines of, I would be delighted to get to that point, but I feel like I still am learning about the job and the organization and your goals in filling this position at this time. That's literally what you say. And you can say that a couple times, maybe with slightly different words if you need to. Someone who's not bargaining astute will at least hear what you're saying and put it off. They might try to circle back to it, hopefully not. Someone who knows how to negotiate will respect, like, okay, that's fair enough. Now, in very few cases, and it really is few, interviewer may say, well, I can't put you through the process any further until I have a number, right? If you get that, then of course, I'm not going to tell you, like, you shouldn't answer it. But then when we talk about preparation, that you do need to do some backup emergency prep so that if you are really pressed on that and you're literally told, I can't push you through the process without a number, which is really, honestly, rude. It's very disempowering to workers, right? If that's the case, then you need to prepare some sort of a number, but a number that doesn't lowball you and create this low anchor on subsequent conversations. So I'm going to bracket that, but that's always a question that comes up. So who are the parties when you're at the negotiation after you've had an offer? the prospective employee. And then in a negotiation, it might be the supervisor, it might be an HR person. If it's a larger organization, you're not really sure who it's going to be, although it's good to ask in advance so you can kind of mentally prepare. But those are the two parties, right? The items are the resources to be allocated. So I keep saying compensation, that's not just pay, right? At this stage, you need to be thinking about a lot more than just pay. You're talking about wages or salary, earnings, right? You're thinking about health insurance, that's employer provided, about contributions to a retirement savings plan. You're thinking about paid time off. You're thinking about professional development budget and time. Supervision that's provided by the agency. I mean, there'd be other things that, depending upon the job and you, that might be on your list, but those are definitely on there, right? Maybe not the supervision for everybody, but the big four benefits, absolutely. The pay, health insurance, retirement contribution by the employer, and paid time off. For sure, you are negotiating those at minimum. Okay.
Anna,
yes.
real quick, we had someone message in the chat and I copied it on here. If you could repeat again what you say to the prospective employer when they ask you about what figure or salary you have in mind.
And if you're someone, and we have a really, really important assistant today with Janice. Janice, thank you for showing us. So what you say, and if it's someone that has a sense of humor, or you have a sense of humor, you can deliver this in a certain way. Again, art, not science only. You can say, I would be so delighted, excited, whatever, to get to that point. I'm talking about that. But I feel like at this point, I'm still learning about the job and about the organization and what you're looking for in hiring for this position at this time. That's what you say. Okay.
Awesome.
Right. And you can recycle that at least once. Sorry, what?
Yeah. Oh, and we also had a follow-up question. So the question was, is that still a question in New York? With the new transparency law in New York, companies are mandated to put or reveal their salary in the job ad.
Right. So hopefully if there's a range, whether they're mandated to or not, they won't ask you that. Right. They may refer to as the range acceptable. And you could say, if they refer to the range, you can say, I think something could be worked out there. I wouldn't say literally the range is acceptable, because I might still suggest that you try to negotiate outside the range. But you can say, I think it's workable. Right. The thing to note about the New York City, it's state law of transparency on wages is what we found is that the ranges that are being offered are like from $30,000 to $150,000. Wow, that's helpful. So I mean, some of them are narrower, but it may be that the range is not super constructive or instructive. But that if it's going to help the employer not ask you about that in the interview, that's amazing. Or if they do, and there is a range, you can say, I think something around the range can be worked out. So you can refer to that. Right. Okay. Let me talk about position versus interest. Okay. The position is what you, like each party is a negotiator, right? You're negotiating together, is what you say publicly to that person. Your interest is your underlying and your private, not shared need or interest or want that you have that you hope will be addressed in your position. So this is like, for example, you pick a certain salary. We'll talk about how to do that. And that's based upon what you think you're worth. You know, the schooling that you have, all the good experience you have, and you got a whole bunch of bills and you want to save for a house. Like, you just kind of figure this all out, but you are not going to share that with the other person, right? Because, for example, there may be people that are employed at that organization who are horribly underpaid, who might have like 2 PhDs, PsyD and an MSW, 20 years of clinical experience, and they've got like 14 kids and they're renting. And you are coming up with your stuff, asking for a chunk of money, and by comparison, they're like, what? No. Like, so sharing any individual basis, like sharing any basis for your positions, like any justification, especially if not asked for, can in fact inadvertently look offensive, because you wind up getting compared to others, right? And you act like you're coming off as special. You just keep it clean. You don't justify, as we'll talk about in a little bit. You just simply give clean positions, and all that basis, all that background That is your private rationale. Okay, we'll talk about what to do when you're asked for a justification, but you don't offer it, you don't volunteer it. Okay, let's move on. Okay, now some other nitty-gritty bits and pieces for the model of negotiating. So target point, reservation point, really important. And pretty simple. The target point is where you want to end up, but you have one for every item. So your target point for your salary, target point for what you want to pay. So sometimes the target points are high salary, sometimes they're low, like what you have to pay out, like for health insurance, like your premium, that's the monthly or per paycheck fee, even if you don't go to the doctor. Copay, coinsurance, pay for when you do go to the doctor, right? So those things you ideally want them to be low, but you want to set targets for those. For contribution to your retirement savings, that should be a higher number. Paid days off, higher number, right, relative to the employer. And then your reservation point, that's your bottom line. And by definition, this is kind of important to think about. It doesn't mean like, yeah, that's important to you. Like, you know, it means that literally if an offer on any item, and you have these points for every single item, if an offer comes below that in the case of the employee, or I guess for health insurance, it's above it, you are by definition saying no. That's a very, it sounds extreme. It's very important to take that in, because if you don't have bottom lines on any item, on all of your items, you're not negotiating. You will accept whatever you are given. That might be the most important thing I have to say today. And it's kind of existential. We can take that away in our general living period, right? If you don't have a bottom line that you are willing to defend, meaning not that you're going to like shove the table over, forget this, I'm out of here, but that you're not willing to say no on the basis of that bottom line not being met, you are not negotiating. You are accepting whatever's given to you. So we'll talk about how to set that in just a minute. I will note that every job, every item has a different set of bottom lines, because every job, if it's a big organization, small organization, nature of the job, those points are going to vary. It isn't just about you. It is a little bit about context too. Okay, the BATNA, that's an acronym, Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. So that's, if you don't take this job, if it violates your bottom lines, what else are you going to do? And obviously, as you go through the job process and you get offers, you have negotiations like, in the bank or whatever. Your BATNA is, well, you got one job. If the other one doesn't work out, you can fall back on that one. So that's an awesome BATNA. Like you've got a pretty good backup job that you've negotiated, but you haven't taken it yet. At the beginning, you have bills, you don't have a job offer yet. It can feel scary. Like I don't have one. Like, how can I set? Because the thing is, you can't really have a bottom line unless you have a backup plan. Like, how will you sustain yourself before getting into that amazingly negotiated and otherwise awesome job before you have that? So what can be helpful before you dig into a search is really thinking through, what is your BATNA? What is your backup plan, so that you can have decent BATNA, decent bottom lines, that they're not zero. Like that you can actually aim higher, right? So how are you going to sustain yourself for like 3 months, 6 months, whatever, in a job search, so you can really keep those things, keep a high standard for yourself, right? And I cannot, I have no right to dictate how you do that or what they should be, but it's a thing that it will strengthen your negotiating power, right? That's why it's important to have those. Yes, Catherine.
Hi. So, I don't know if any of you guys saw me in the chat, but I said that I always find a job that is flexible to my schedule, because with school and everything, I don't want it to impact my school and preventing me from doing all the coursework. So, you said because I'm a transfer student and I had a job, I think it was back in March of 2022. Yeah, so it was about a year ago. I had a job and I worked in a warehouse.
Mhm.
And I quit that job because, well, first of all, I had to work long hours and
Mhm.
I worked 5 days a week. So, and I
So are
also,
you asking Catherine about negotiating for hours or schedule? Like if we can kind of get to
yeah,
the question.
like cutting down short hours,
Yeah. So the scheduling, which I really care about it. I studied it for the last nearly decade. Very important.
Mhm.
I would say that is a bit of a job design feature. So I would encourage anybody interviewing where that's really, really important to get into a discussion, ask questions about job schedule, a typical day, a typical week in terms of timing as well as location potentially during the interview to get a sense of things. And then armed with that information, then you can potentially negotiate. It may be that what comes up seems reasonable and workable for you, and you don't have to talk about it further. But if need be, you can absolutely make that part of the negotiation. So, okay, let me cruise to these other points quickly. Bargaining zone, talked about that at the beginning. That's this overlap that almost always, I mean, occasionally not, but almost always there's this overlap between what one person's willing to give and what the other person's willing to receive, right? And the beauty of bargaining is if you can actually engage it for long enough, doing a back and forth, as we'll talk about, both parties have this potential of being better off, right? It's when things kind of artificially, prematurely settle, and it's almost always, especially with social work associated folks, settling against the favor of the employee. When they artificially settle, you don't have a chance to get to that point, but through a give and take process, it's actually possible for both parties to be better off and well served by this. But it does mean sitting down for the longer haul and just breathing and going for it, right? It does mean kind of just diving into the process. And then information is gold. The interwebs are your friend here, right? So figuring out, doing extensive research on the organization, on jobs like the one you're applying to at other organizations, as well as like mining your network of people, of staff, faculty, other students that you know in social work. Just the more you can figure out about what a given job might compensate as, the better, right? Literally thousands of dollars better in some cases. Okay, so let's prepare. How do you get ready for this? So again, other thing to note, it is very commonly the experience of folks that I've taught before or after I've taught them, that they interview for the job, they get a call. The call is, we'd love to have you. Here's the salary. What do you think? You want it? I mean, not exactly said that informally, but something like literally on the spot. There's no offer for negotiation. So note to all of you future employers, don't do that, right? If you care about salary, compensation, equity, and accessibility, you provide a separate time for both of you to talk through that and for everyone to get all kinds of full information about it, okay? So you get hammered like, oh, you want the job? Here's the salary. Okay, so you're going to need to potentially, in that case, actually create a space for negotiating. And it's a bummer that you, as the one down prospective employee, have to do that sometimes, but you may. So I would strongly encourage you, because there's no way I would ever take a job where I'm just hammered with, here's the salary, do you want it? What? I would say something like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I really enjoyed the interview. Of course, you will have already sent a thank you for the interview before this. What wonderful information. It would be really helpful to me if we could sit down, and schedule a time in the next, day or two. Don't make them wait. To talk through what you're offering in terms of compensation package. And then I can do some thinking in the meantime. Okay, so you may unfortunately need to actually create a session for yourself if you're not offered it. But if you are an employer, you should offer that, right? You really have no business not. It can cause some problems down the road managerially and in terms of salary equity issues. So assuming that you're prepping, right? So you've gotten the offer and you're prepping. You want to, I like tables, create a table, whatever you go for, a list of all the items that are important to you: salary, health insurance, retirement contribution, paid time off, if you want supervision that's provided by the organization, professional development, whatever those are. And then the thing to note is those have subcategories, right? So salary, you also could be leading into a discussion about how, what their offer is in terms of raises, the amount of the raise, when the raise would come, when the raises would come. And note a turn of phrase that I just said there, what their offer is. Let that sink into what their offer is. You are not asking, how do you handle How do you manage raises here? You see the difference? That language is like in stone. This is how it's done here. It can't be done differently, right? Versus, what is your offer? And the thing is that some of these things, like health insurance, I'm not kind of naive. These are third-party contracted situations. You are not going to negotiate a separate premium for your health insurance. Nonetheless, in the context of negotiation, it represents the employer's offer to you. And that's what it stands. And it's part of the space of negotiation. So the wording needs to be, what is your offer for, right? And you don't say, what is your offer for? Again, art as much as science. So what is your offer for, right? Okay, so list the items, set those target points. Where do you want to end? And you think through like, but based upon like your fit for the job, your education, your experience, and in these specific areas the job wants, as well as your goals, like, where you think you should be salary-wise, your aspirations, what you want to save for, where you need to support other people, send money to other dependents, like all of that, right? In the context of, yes, your information about the job and the organization, certainly you ground it and you set those target points, those values across every item in a way that is what I call feasibly ambitious, right? So feasible, it's in the context of the job and the organization and like the cost of living in the area, but it's also ambitious. It's not shortchanging yourself. And I have to say, in 23 years of teaching this, there was one time, there was a man who had been a lawyer for about 20 years and then wanted to become a social worker. And talking to him, he was not feasible in his thinking about salary. I have literally, in the hundreds of people I've worked with negotiating, I have never had someone come off as anything but under ambitious. Occasionally they're kind of right about at it, but by far the concern is that you're not ambitious enough, as opposed to being too ambitious or infeasible. And what I tell my students when I teach them this in HR management is, this is not the time to talk to your nervous parents or grandparent or their friend who's like, oh, are you sure you want to do that? No. Take the friends and the family to consult with who are like, yeah, darn right. Right. That's the people. Those who you are talking. If you want to consult with anybody, it's those people. This is not the time to talk to the folks who are nervous, right? That said, this is your process. And so you need to feel comfortable with what you come up with. But I'm encouraging you, don't be careful who you get advice from. So set the target points for every item. And then you're going to set your reservation points. And how do you do that? You think about that bad net. What's your backup plan? Get that backup plan as solid as you can. If you need to move back in with your parents for a time, easier said than done. Or whatever your options are, right? I think through if this is going to take 6 months, I think it's not totally uncommon. How can you swing it where you don't literally have to just lunge at the first opportunity and that you're not nervous setting robust bottom lines, right? So you go through your BATNAs, think about that, and then you set a bottom line that feels like it meets your minimum value and is sustainable for you, right? And then that's your reservation point. And then you set your opening offers. In US negotiating culture, not just US, but definitely US, where you start, like it's the opening offer, is not where you're supposed to end, right? Think about it like at a flea market, or if you're bargaining for a used car. You come in with where you want to buy it or where you want to sell it. And the unspoken norm is you're going to joggle back and forth across you, toggle, jiggle, whatever, across, right? So if that's the case, if that's the norm, and it is, you can't start with your target point because right off the bat, you'll drop, right? So you have to do what I call a buffered target. So your opening offer on every item has to be, in the case of the employee, for most of the items, a little bit higher. I can't say how much. It varies by context. Like salary, a couple $1,000s above where you want to wind up, right? Otherwise, you're not gonna get there. If you start at where you want to wind up, you're going to wind up several $1,000s below at best if you fight really hard, right? So you got to buffer that target. For health insurance, you're starting below where you want to pay, right? Okay. How are we doing in terms of urgent clarifying questions at this point, Lauren?
Yeah, so we have one question in the chat. So it's saying regarding salary negotiation, how do you recommend factoring in prior experience in a field outside of social work? Like, for example, 7 years of work experience before going into social work field.
Yes. So here's how I think about that. I think about that in terms of where you aim to apply in the first place. So the kinds of job you'll be applying for, presumably, unless you're going, if you're doing a switch, you were business and now you're clinical, it's not necessarily going to net you that much, unfortunately. If you were business and your map, then I imagine you're going to be launching into a higher level management type job or policy job than some of your classmates might, right? So it kind of depends upon how much of a career change versus flow you're going. So it affects the level of job you're aiming for, and then in turn, probably affects your candidacy, where you're more likely to get an offer. Beyond that, I would say it should give you some wind under your sails about the ambitiousness of your target points, like setting them high. But I would really strongly, again, discourage you from giving any unasked for justification about why you are wanting the amounts that you're wanting, right? I want this because da, 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 da. Anything you say after the because could be taken in the worst case as offensive. Like, who do you think you are, right? And it tends to make you sound nervous or unsure, like the way it's delivered, as much as the point. So use all of that to aim high in your applications to help you hopefully get offers in the first place, and then help you feel confident in setting your target points high. But do not bring that verbiage proactively into a negotiation session. Okay. Other questions? That'd be good.
So we have 4 more questions. I don't know if you want to answer them now or wait until the Q&A. It's up to you.
Let me go through this slide, and then we'll turn back and we'll kind of see where we're standing. How's that? Okay.
Sounds
But
good.
if you could, while I do that, Laura, if you could look and see if there are clarifying questions, like what do you mean by blah, blah, blah? Like, I definitely want to get to those on priority. So you're opening offers, okay, and then context, right? So for those of you who are environmentally sensitive, it's helpful to know where this is going to be held, how long it's going to be. That's always helpful, actually. Who it's going to be with, right? Is it your future supervisor? Is it an HR person? Is it more than one person? Find that out. It's fine to ask. Like, hey, so I'm looking forward to this. Can I ask, how long we're aiming for? Who's going to be there? All that kind of thing. Get there early, right? Do what you need to do. You know yourself best to be as calm and like feeling emotionally prepared as possible. Like, treat yourself well in advance of that. Give yourself lots of psychic room as you go into it. Okay, that's this slide. How about some questions about preparation? If it's about doing it, we're going to the doing it next slide. So are there any preparation questions?
There was one just like considering like the negotiation elements. So say if you already have insurance, do you mention that, or like, is that a factor with negotiating?
Okay, so think about for those of you that have bought a car and you have a trade-in, right? Where you buy the car and then you trade in a car and get some money back. Okay, you never mention the trade-in until you negotiate the cost of the car. You get the absolute rockinest best price, in this case, it's the lower end on the new car or new to you car that you're going to purchase. And then you mention, okay, so I have this vehicle that I want to trade in. What can you offer for that? Because if you do it up front, you're not going to know what's affecting what here, right? So with health insurance, I have a couple of different thoughts about this, but you also don't mention that either. You try to negotiate for the best deal possible on insurance. And of course, again, you're not, and I say that, but I know you're not going to negotiate a cheaper premium, right? But it's nonetheless important because, and think about it from a social justice standpoint, even if you aren't going to need the insurance, if an agency is offering you, let's say it's solid to maybe impressive health insurance, and you've come to find out in negotiating that their offer, what they do for the premium for healthcare is like $1,000 a month. So suddenly that amazing salary offer, it's like, whoa, that's why. And it's actually not amazing. The salary offer, when you net out the health insurance cost, is way low. So from a social justice standpoint, like even if you don't need it, this is an important issue for your would-be or current colleagues who do need it. But it keeps agencies honest in the sense that, there is a practice, it is admittedly, sorry, that's a sneezing cat in the background. Sorry. There's a practice that some organizations have to hold themselves to a true cost of service delivery, where if someone is not using the insurance, they usually it's a fixed amount, but they give that person some payment for not using the insurance, like $3,000. I've seen which is a fraction of what the agency would pay if they had to pay for the insurance. But it is a way of not zeroing out that line item for the employees who have the privilege of access elsewhere. And it keeps things a little honest in the budget. So rather than, because otherwise you almost have this moral hazard, this incentive of organizations to hope at least that their employees don't need health insurance. What does that mean? It means having a set of employees who have what I call compensating resources outside of the organization, that have partners who make lots of money and get amazing benefits. So the nonprofit doesn't need to do that. It creates this whole effect where nonprofits and their funders are not really pushing for, we need to make this okay. Like we need to make livable, legit, well-paying jobs for social workers and for helping professionals more broadly. So I would say, don't mention it. I would see what they have to say, what their offer is. And then you can choose, even frankly, after the conversation, to say, actually, I'm not going to need that. That is totally fine. Okay, other questions that are like clarifying?
Yes, I think one other would be good for the clarifying one.
Sure.
So someone asked, how do you access people in the same field or recent graduates to know what like salary to ask for or to gauge that?
So I don't have a good beat on that. I mean, I think GSA, I'd like to nominate y'all for, helping people with that. I mean, people have networks. I know there's various, I'm sounding like old here, like various chat groups and things that students are connected to through. I would just try to mine people. Like there may be folks that are interns at certain organizations where they can give you some information, talk to faculty. Faculty have different connections to that level of information at organizations. People at your field placement would be great resources potentially. And, obviously, if they're trying to hire you and you're asking about a different organization, that can be a little complicated. But generally speaking, you all have a depth of interconnected networks that you should be poised to mine here. And that's pretty much the best I can suggest in that regard. Other?
So after that question we had as well, if you work in a nonprofit social work agency, some employers say that there's no room for salary negotiations since the salaries are set by the funders or the city. So how would you respond to that?
I would still set up a session where you are discussing what their compensation package offer is. So even if they can't negotiate, even if they say they can't negotiate, I would still set up a session because you need to know in detail what the offer is. You definitely, if you're lucky enough to have health insurance elsewhere, that's one thing. But if you need health insurance, you need to know what their offer is in terms of what that's going to cost you. You need to know the pay. You need to know what they're offering in terms of raise structures, the paid time off. That is something that could be imminently negotiable. The contribution to retirement. So in order for you to be comparing different job offers potentially, you have to have the opportunity to know that full set of information, right? And what I would say is, so while some things may be fixed, not all of them are, it's still important to have a negotiation session. I would also say it's really, really important not to ask, right? Because even if an item is negotiable, no one on either side loves negotiating. Some people do. I actually have met them. I'm not one of them. I like talking about it and consulting about it, but I do it. But no one likes it such that if they're given the chance to say, no, it's not negotiable, they're going to say that, whether or not it's actually true. So, other pressing, clarifying questions?
That was it for like the clarifying questions. I don't know if you have time for others or want to wait till Q&A.
let me do this slide and then we can go back to the chat questions for sure and then kind of flow in. But this is, now we're actually doing it. Like now we're negotiating. We've done our prep. And as any students here that have had me for HR management or even management policy, or practice and theory, have heard me say all this, but also this little visual metaphor. So I imagine a negotiating session. Well, okay, let me back up. Those of you that have kids, or even if you don't have kids, you've taken kids to a children's museum. Usually there are children's museums, and somewhere in a corner, it becomes obvious why it needs to be off in a corner. There often are these little air current things. There are holes in the floor or in some box, and there's air current that shoots up. And the playful thing, you see balls, like when you approach the area, you'll see all these balls everywhere, including off to the sides of the room. And you're like, what's happening? And you realize the task for the kids is to try to balance the ball on the air currents. And of course, if they don't get it just right, it flings everywhere, knocks into parents' heads. They get very annoyed, they're on their phones or whatever. So that thing, my kids used to like that, is like what negotiating starting is. If you imagine that the end of the negotiation is like the floor, or let's say the base of the air, where the air current's coming out, and that's the done deal. And there are these currents. And so the start of negotiation, you have a set of balls. Each ball is an item or an issue that you want to negotiate about. And so the very start of the process is simply perching those balls on their air currents. Okay, so what the heck am I saying? What I mean is when you start the negotiation, you don't dive into numbers. You simply get together. Oh my gosh, it's so exciting, to be here. Thank you so much for the offer. I'm really, really appreciative. And I'm really, I appreciate and looking forward to having a conversation about the compensation package. Thank you for making time. So, and then maybe the employer, that's you or the employer, whatever, the employer ideally. So when your employers, please do this, will kick in with, okay, yeah, great, nice to see you. So here's what I thought we would talk about today. And it's a table of contents. It's an agenda. This, that, and the other, right? No amounts. You're just simply listing the items to talk about. If though the employer dives in with, nice to see you. Yes, awesome. So what do you think about in terms of salary? It behooves you to back up, and you're going to have to, because you're facilitating, but they're in power relatively. So you have to be kind of, again, artistic about it. Say, oh, I'm so excited to get started. Thank you. But I think it would help me if we could just list out what we're going to talk about today. So for example, I'd obviously love to talk about salary. So then go through with your list. Here's the reason that's actually really important is if you defer that, you can facilitate it into a direct discussion of items, one item, they didn't give you time to make your list, but then later on, like let's say you talk about salary and you're not there yet, you're back and forthing with different numbers. And then you bring in other items, it's going to make you sound gamey, like you're responding to being unhappy about the salary discussion by bringing up something else, even though that's not your intent. You were just simply doing what they facilitated you into. But there's actually a reason to stick in your list so that it's upfront, it's out there, you're not being gamey. You want to talk about these eventually. And that make it then, get that other person to add some items that you hadn't thought of. That's cool. So get all of those balls on the air currents. Okay, and then you're doing the offer, counter offer volley with one item at a time for a little bit. Presumably salary, you'll start with. Ideally, you want the other party to go first. Whoever you are, you want the other one to go first, right? And we can kind of guess why this is, right? For, let's say you're the employee, you go first, there's a substantial chance that you will lowball yourself, right? That you will come in lower than what given my students who I've taught, compared to what the employer would have even started with, right? That would be a big shame. You're literally at that point leaving money on the table before you even get started, right? So if you can, the employer may say, so what do you think about in terms of salary? And you should say, again, art, not science, very respectfully, thank you so much for getting the ball rolling. It would be helpful to hear what you had in mind, right? And if they respond, why don't you get started? Okay, then the gig's up, you got to fork over a number, right? But it's worth trying, right? My former husband, who is also an MSW, some of you may know him, he teaches in the school. He between his first and second years of his master's program at Chicago, he applied for and got a position at the MacArthur Foundation. This is way long ago, so the number is going to sound scary low. But in the interview, also, the interviewer asked him what he wanted for salary. So first mistake, don't do that then. And then Eric said, oh, I was thinking, so he did two mistakes in one. He went first. And then the other thing he did that you should not do is give a range. You always want to give a clear number, right? He said, I was thinking of between 8 and 10 an hour. So what do we all think he got? $8 an hour, right? It could be that the other guy was thinking 12, right? And he wound up with 8. So don't go first if you can avoid it, and definitely always give a clear number. I was thinking, and you can kind of soften it with how you say it. Like there's a difference between saying, I was thinking 8. I mean, 8 is kind of, so let's move that. I was thinking 25. I was thinking 25 versus I was thinking 25. Like a little head nod, like the little squishy eyebrows kind of softens it without adding the softening language that literally gives you up money, right? Okay, so you go back and forth. So first offer, then a counter to that, then a counter to the counter, and then maybe one final counter. Increments should be tight, right? You want to give up a dump down a huge amount, especially because chances are the employer will stay pretty tight and they're at what they give. So you want to stay tight too. And then another kind of rule of thumb, guidance about this period of time, when you give an offer or a counter offer to the other person's offer, you want to give, again, a solid number with a smile, whatever, and then sit tight. Do not say another word, including any of that justification stuff, because I promise you, anything out of your mouth after that number is bad news. Oh, but that's just a start. Oh, I mean, because of this, or because I really think I deserve it, or oh, like anything you say after that number, it's incredibly unlikely that it's going to help, and it may really harm. You may sound nervous and confident, all that. But conversely, when the other party gives an offer or counter offer, whatever, well, you don't want to step on their words. You don't want to sit too long, because if you wait and kind of think about it, it can send one of two signals or both that you're nervous about engaging, and that's going to horse smelling fear, not an ideal thing. But it also may signal inadvertently that you're more okay with that number than you are, right? So you want to just, through your preparation, you have all your notes. It's absolutely critical in my mind, not just okay, to have notes with you. Where you have this table, like each item and your target points and your reservation points, your bottom line and your buffer target, and maybe even some increments that you're willing to go down, right? Between your target and between your buffer and your reservation point. Anyway, so you go back and forth, and then you're going to pause. This is weird. It's like learning to ride a bike. You are not going to settle on that item, okay? Because you've only talked about one thing, and especially salary. That's the biggest darn thing. You don't know enough yet to know to be okay with that. So you are going to table that item. Like, whoa, how do you do that? So you're going to say something like, this has been really helpful. And then at this point, you're going to reflect on your feeling about the latest number. And you do want to reflect with your face and words and tone. You need to give some sense of how far off it is, because if you are more positive at this moment than you actually are, that positivity is going to stick with the person. And when it comes time to coming back to this item, and you suddenly want to push really hard on it, you're going to be like, what the heck? We were like done. We were like, it was so close. So you do want to signal. So if it's pretty close, you can say, I really appreciate all this back and forth. It's not quite where I see a little squishy face. It's not quite where this is just me, of course. It's not quite where I need it to be yet, but I think it's getting there, and it would be helpful at this point to hear about, and then pick another item. If it's really not there yet, you could say, I really appreciate this back and forth. It's admittedly not where I need it to be yet. But I think it would be helpful to talk about, turn to some other items. This is a whole package. And that's also helpful because you're then signaling that you appreciate, while salary is important, it is a whole package. So you signal that, and then you pick the item, or maybe they pick it for you, whatever. And you turn to that, and you're going to do a back and forth again on that item. right? Now, sometimes you can table that and go to a third. That's a little, for a lot of people, that's like, no, that's like way too much in the air, right? So maybe you do 2 and you say, okay, this has been very helpful. Thinking about these 2 sets of items. And what this phase is now is the concessions, your pairing concessions. So you have the balls, remember the balls are on the currents with those individual back and forth, that single item, they've kind of gone down closer to the final tabletop, the negotiated agreement. Like they're both, this one came down salary, it's still above the table, it's not settled yet. And then, this one came down further, the health insurance, let's say, but it's not settled yet. And just remember, once it's settled, like if you drop that down singly, but whenever you drop it down, it's not like super glue on the table, but it's industrial strength Velcro. And so if you settle an item and then you do it early by itself before you hear about what might be some grisly other things coming, and then you realize, oh my gosh, I really want to go back and like up the salary because this is like so bad. It's like a deafening sound, ripping that ball off the Velcro. It's like not good for trust. So it's why it's handy to keep the balls brought down, but not quite settled. And you settle them then together. And so what you do, the wording is, I really appreciate the second set of conversation. Thinking across these 2, I'd be willing to go to X on salary, and X might be the employer's most recent offer, or it might be a little bit higher, but maybe a little lower than your last offer. I'd be willing to go to X on salary if you could meet me at Y on whatever the thing was, whether that was the health insurance, the premium, or the contribution to retirement. Contribution to retirement might be negotiable. It's a percentage of your base, or it's a percentage matching of what you contribute. Paid time off is definitely negotiable in almost all cases, or many cases at least. With the health insurance, right? That's not going to be negotiable, chances are, but you find out what they're offering in terms of the premium for starters. And let's say that's much higher than what your bottom line was or what your target was. You can say, okay, thank you for sharing the current premium cost for my category. That is admittedly quite a bit higher or whatever than I was aiming for. I could accept that if you would come to me on salary from your last offer of X to Y. So this is Pareto optimality, to use the economics term, where both parties can actually wind up better off, and they reveal their really true major interests. It may, just because something's not negotiable does not mean it doesn't belong in the negotiation space. If what was offered on that quote unquote fixed item is not what you want, you can still leverage that for some other item that is negotiable, right? It should not be the case, but it almost always is, or it so often is in social work negotiations, that when an organization says it's not possible, that the employee eats it. No, there should be at least some effort in the gestalt of that whole package to have a give and take. Okay, the organization can't meet the employee on this. Where else can they meet the employee? And having a conversation about that. So you're going to do those concessions, and then as needed, go back to the single item discussion. Like, if you settled 2, brought them down, they're on the table. So you've done an exchange. Health insurance, let's say, is more expensive premium than you wanted, but you've been able to get the employer to go up on the salary. Or maybe you keep those from being fixed and you go into the retirement contribution, which is basically salary. It's just deferred for when you're 65 or older, right? And you negotiate that, and then you kind of settle them as a 3-way, right? You can do that too. Do the same with the additional items that are being negotiated, where you do a back and forth on the single item, and then perhaps it's sometimes with the smaller ones you might just bring them down solo, or you can try to do a concession too. If I could do X on this item, could you do Y on that item? It's a back and forth. And that's the wording. If you could do this, I could do this, right, etc. Let me think about that. We'll just review my notes real quickly. So you're going to go back and forth until you finish all the items, and then it would be good to review them. Here's my understanding. Hopefully the employer guides that. Make sure you take really good notes, and it is fine to take breaks, to pause and say, oh, this is really important. I just want to be sure It's reflected in my notes. And review to make sure that you all have a shared understanding, because so many numbers potentially will be gone back and forth. So review, look at your notes, review your understanding, and then toward wrapping up, you can ask for a little time to reflect, or you can decide on the spot. That's absolutely up to you. What I would say is at that point, so barring something dramatic happening after that moment, like that you get another offer and a negotiation and it's better, or you learn something about the job, like, oh, it's full-time hours when you thought you were getting paid for half-time, like then you would have to kind of crack back open. But barring those other things, at the point where the negotiation's done, you're basically saying yes or no. So if you have any concerns or anything that you're not psyched about, and you want any chance at influencing them at all, it needs to be done before you close that arc, that session. And you can defer actually saying yes. You can consult with friends, family about what you should do, yes or no. But you can't really call back absent another offer or something, and then reopen it. It's done at that point. So okay, let me pause. We are at 5:29. There are two other slides, but I think this is the most. They're ones that are about kinds of how to handle challenges. But let's get to your challenges first, and then we can add those if we have time.
Okay, yeah. So there's like one question that pertains directly to the slide, and then I don't know if you want to run through the other two and then the rest of the questions in the chat.
Sure. And again, I can't see any of them, so I will look to you to guide.
All right. So yeah, so the clarifying question we have is, how would you quantify other items in the total package that don't have a monetary value, such as supervision for LCSW hours? So you can determine if the total package offer is fair or the value of it.
Mm-hmm. The way to quantify the supervision is to figure out what it would cost for you to pay for it yourself. That's very monetizable. And presumably if they have an LCSW there, I mean, she or he or they may be full, not have room, but they have, at least in theory, the capacity to offer that. And they may really try to do that as a Benny, as a good thing that they offer in that job. But you can absolutely just cost out. Like if you had this amazing job and otherwise you totally love, and the package was incredible, but they do not do supervision, what would you have to pay to get it? So, yeah, and then there are things like, paid time off and, up against, pay or other items. I mean, paid time off has a value too. You can literally calculate at a given rate of pay what the paid time off would be, basically. The other thing to note too, I'm sorry, with those items too, there are other components of paid time off. So not only is it all the different kinds of paid time off, and some organizations do a banking approach where they're all together, it's a total. Others separate them, especially public sector. So it's, sick, vacation, holiday, personal, they're separate. So you want to be sure when you prep, it would be a good idea to prep the individual days and then have a sum of them so that you're prepared for either way the organizational negotiator will present them to you. And along those lines too, prep the numbers for days, which are days of the week, right? So 1 week is 5 days. It doesn't count the weekends, but prep for the days number as well as the week, because they may come at you with a different unit than you prepped. And then you're like having to do quick math and it's like, oh, you're already so nervous. So prep for the number of days, the number of weeks, for both combined as well as for individual. And then on top of that, there's things like waiting periods. You can negotiate waiting periods. Right of first access to whatever benefit, health insurance, like you need to know, that's really important, right? And if you have a family and you have to have, health insurance immediately, that should absolutely be part of your negotiation, right? And then accrual rates, right? With paid time off, there's like what you get the first year for whatever type of payday, and then how it accrues over time. Like what is their offer in that regard? And maybe you want to, you need to know that as a policy, but then you may be able to negotiate a front-loaded first year, for example. So they're different. Each item's got like a whole bunch of other little sub items to it potentially. And those are more or less important depending on the person. Okay, other questions?
And then we have another question to clarify. Do you need to give a definite answer at the end of the negotiation session? Or can you say that you would like to think about it and get back to them in a day or two?
Yeah, so as I said, I think I addressed that already. You don't have to say right away. You can say, thank you, this has been extremely helpful. I think I need a little bit of time to think about it. I'm happy to get back to you. I wouldn't string them along, like get back to you, in a day. I suppose if you literally have a negotiation for another offer, like 3 days later, you can say, I really appreciate this time. I'm excited about this opportunity. I do need to finish the negotiation with this other position, which is not until 3 days later. And as soon as that concludes, I will absolutely get back to you. And when you get back to them, then it may be, if the offer is like a heck of a lot better, then maybe you are revisiting. That's a case where you may revisit and open up the offer for some getting under the hood again. Saying that may also suddenly motivate the employer to be a little more ambitious with what they offer you, or they may at least be prepared to do that, where you say that and they're waiting for your other negotiation process. So yeah, you can absolutely wait, but you can't, again, barring another offer, you can't just like call back like, oh, can we talk about that some more? No, you need to talk about, in terms of the basics, barring other changes, you need to get into that at the negotiation session originally.
Okay, and then another clarification question was, can you ask the prospective employer to pay for supervision to become an LCSW of your choice, like outside of that organization?
It might be hard if they have someone on offer there. Like they may have a system where that's their offer, is we have someone available. You could try to get at that by negotiating for a professional development fund, where you're getting their okay for using that towards supervision. But I mean, depending on the cost of that, that would be quite a lot of money. But you can certainly, those would be the two ways I would do it. Is you would, if they say, well, we offer it, if that's not what you want, then you would try to negotiate for some sort of a professional development fund, and your target amount would be some amount that's enough in your mind to cover at least a decent amount of out-of-pocket paid supervision, plus whatever conferences, other trainings. The catch being, though, from a negotiating standpoint, if they feel that they can offer it to you from a current employee, there's a little bit less incentive for them to pay you for that because they feel like they have it. So, but you can certainly try. Absolutely. Don't ask. You just simply say, in terms of, again, what's their offer for supervision? They give it to you. What's their offer for professional development? They have a number, you have a number, and your number includes that. If you don't want it at the agency for whatever reason, and you go forth.
And then the next one is, how common is it for a prospective employer to ask for confirmation of your current salary, like recent pay stubs in the negotiation process?
Honestly, in some places, I believe that's illegal. That is like, so employers, please don't do that. I mean, let's think about how problematic that is. Let's think about the amount of, this is not answering your question. So how common? It probably does happen, but it is a lawsuit just sitting right there in your lap. Because think about all of the wage inequity that people experience, even in staying in the same career job to job, where a previous job, they may have been paid so horribly and illegally below their value. And now a subsequent employer is going to attempt to base the new job's pay on that. Like, a new employer doesn't want any business with what might have been shenanigans of pay from a previous place. Like, it is about the current job, that organization, and the employee that you're engaging with. Like, so I would, if I were the employee, and again, this is me, you are in control of your own negotiation. that would be a red flag. And I would say, my acceptance of this job is based upon, the nature of the job and the ways I can contribute and having a really solid compensation opportunity. And I don't see that as relevant. Now, granted, that's a little spicy, I realize. But if not that spicy, something along those lines, that you really don't have to share that. So, and it's a little bit of a red flag in my mind.
Okay. And then Next one is, what do you say if the organization claims they can't pay more while doing negotiations?
Yeah, so you have a session, we have all these different items. And so you are asking for what their offers are. And that's how you word it on all of these different things. Like, what are you offering in terms of health insurance? It also, it's the type of insurance, PPO, HMO, PPO, major choice, out of network benefits, HMO, in network only, cheaper generally. So what choice, that's that. And then within those, what are the premiums that you'd be paying, right? What are they offering in terms of contribution to retirement savings? What are they? So you just negotiate, when they give you an offer and you say, thank you for getting the ball rolling. That is, less than what I had in mind. I was thinking X. So you just negotiate until you hit a wall. And then you continue to negotiate and try to do concessions as best you can until you finally hit a wall, basically. So, but I would continue to do that. Like, I would try to pair. So if salary's fixed, you say, thank you for sharing. That's admittedly disappointing. I was thinking more like X. I mean, if it's a matter of like $1,000 difference from your buffered target or even your target and what they say out of the gate is not negotiable, that's one thing. If they say that out of the gate and it's like $10,000, $5,000 lower than what you're aiming for, then you really do either need to drop it. Like, I'm sorry, this isn't going to work. Or I think better is to say, wow, that's admittedly, that's less than I was aiming, that I was thinking it would be. I was aiming for, and then it's whatever they said plus amount. See how they respond. Well, I'm sorry, it's not negotiable. Then you'd say, okay, well, I think it would be helpful to turn to item X and hear what you're offering for that, right? And just carry on, and then see if you have any leeway around some concessions out of that. And what I would say is, if their fixed salary is below your bottom line out of the gate, I think that's showing if they're being honest versus gamey. They may be being gamey. Like, honestly, people say that and they don't mean it. But if it's true, it may be that there's no bargaining zone, and that, I mean, you shouldn't take the job, because the thing is, the way you set your bottom lines, that they should be, I can't tell you what they are, but they should be inviolable going into that session. And so if a fixed non-negotiable salary level is below the bottom line that you set for yourself, it should by definition mean there's nothing moving. And you can say at that point, I'm really sorry, that is lower than I'm able to accept. I was aiming for X. Really conservatively, the lowest I could go is Y. But be careful diving at your bottom line with the first thing the employer says, because again, it's often enough the case that they phrase something as like kind of solid, and it moves. It moves if you get into a discussion of other items. It doesn't always move, but it often does. Okay.
Cool. And then we have, are there any like red flags during an interview that could signify that it's a toxic working environment?
So this is why interviews are really important. Like, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, and this is your shot at getting as much information as possible. So I'd hope that you wouldn't bank on the negotiation session for being the main source of information. Like, you really, really want to have questions that you ask about, where you see the organization headed in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. How does this position fit into that? What does a typical day or week look like, for this job at this organization? What are some of its recent challenges? What are some of the things that it's really excited about? And so just ways of really kind of trying to tease out and unpack that. You could ask to speak to current employees also, potentially. So in terms of negotiation, I mean, if they're just really low paying, if they're really inflexible, if they bristle at the prospect of even a very, very considerate, respectful negotiation process, that, I mean, I wouldn't want any part of that. Again, easy for me to say, but I would not want any part of that. If they're giving you a hard time for essentially trying to engage in a discussion of what the compensation is, that suggests to me a stinginess of not just resources. It's because they can say, I'm really sorry. We're so excited to have you here. But we do, because of the grant that funds this position, we have some limits that, granted, limits that they built in. If they got the grant or contract, they're as much on the hook for having set that stuff as the funder. Like I need to stress that, because our organizations have a role to play in advocating for true, fair, reasonable compensation. So, but getting off that soapbox, the way they can say that to you is, I'm really sorry, but that this is fixed. Like the amount currently we may be able to in the next round be able to increase it, but as of now it's this. This is the health insurance we offer. I can be a little flexible on the paid time off, or blah blah blah. So the delivery could be really supportive, but just as non-negotiable. But someone that's kind of giving you a hard time about negotiating, that to me is potentially toxic. So.
Cool. We have some questions from earlier that are not like on the specific topic. I still wanted to address.
Well, do we want to check in? Does anyone here currently have some questions? Should we maybe try that? What do you think? And if so, do your hands up emoji thing so we can clearly see you.
Yeah, we also had one just pop up as well. So let me get that, and then the raised hands. So from Lisa, it says, are they likely to rescind an offer if you propose a salary outside of their range, or do employers tend to just say that they cannot meet your desired salary, and leave it up to you to decline?
Yeah, and I get, Lisa, I hear your illogical fear. It's probably largely illogical, but it doesn't mean that it's not understandable, right? So we do hear stories, and then they wind up like hanging, like the smell of bad cheese in the air, like of people that's happened to. I would say it's rare. It's definitely rare if you are, again, the art not science thing, if you're respectful in your delivery, and if a range is posted. I can't tell you the exact dollar amount over, at which point it becomes aggressive or like unfeasible. But yeah, I mean, if the range is posted as, I don't know, 65 to 75, and you start with 80, and you do it in they start with, especially if they start with 65, you're like, oh boy, this is going to be rough. But you could say, thank you for getting the ball rolling. I did see the range. Admittedly, I was thinking more like 80. And you have a look on your face and your tone that's, I was thinking more 80. And they may be like, but the thing is, the range gets posted early on, like when they're accepting job applications, and then they get their applications and they realize that they're getting not who they wanted. And they have very few, maybe you're the only one or only couple who are really amazing. And so honestly, if you deliver it, if it's not radically over and you deliver it respectfully, you can say, admittedly, following the interview process, I was thinking more 80, right? And then let me actually add this one important point in. If you are asked to justify, why do you think that, or why, you never talk about your personal stuff, which is the beauty of having an offer, is that they've already said they want your personal stuff. They love you. They want you, right? The personal stuff is now gone. Like, boom, checkbox, done. If you need to justify, it's on the basis of the job, like what the job seems, seems to merit, what seems appropriate for the nature and the responsibilities of the job. You're not talking about you at that point, right? And again, only if you're asked. So I think it's the delivery is really important. And being, I said, with the target point setting, feasibly ambitious. So doing a lot of research, you see the range, but also while you're at it, search for comparable other jobs or other jobs at that organization and see what you find out. Hopefully you find some information out to get a sense of if there are some that are a little higher. And then just come and don't go there. I don't offer that up front. Just say, I was thinking this. And then if you really get pushed on the justification, you can say, based upon the nature and responsibilities of this job, and it seems like in this, the labor market for this position in this area, that seems on target. And then if you say it nicely, then you'll have a conversation and they'll say, yeah, sorry, no, I can't. Then that's fine, but you tried.
And then Paige has her hand up.
Yeah, Paige.
Hi, I had a question about how when we're negotiating these things other than salary, I know usually the offer letter will include the salary, but if you're negotiating things like how much you can work from home, PTO, some of the softer things that even if there's a hard number in the discussion, how do you make sure that they're upheld when it comes to actually working the job? Because sometimes the people hiring aren't even like your direct
Right.
supervisor and stuff.
Right.
So like
No,
when it
so I
comes
would
to like,
absolutely, I would be sure that's in some kind of written document, at least an email, right? Not just verbal, because, or people, even if it's with your supervisor, supervisors change. And so you absolutely want to have that in writing. So, have some kind of conversation about it in the interview, although revealing too much about your preferences for scheduling is tricky, right? Because then they may be like, oh, she doesn't want to, they don't want to work at the agency, they only want to be at home, we don't like that. So you don't want to endanger yourself too much there, but getting information and then looping back to it as needed in the negotiation, and then making sure that language is in a final offer letter. Because they'll need to, presumably if you've negotiated away from the original, any kind of original stated or written offer, you need to re-up all of that anyway. So make sure that language is definitely in there.
And then we have another question in the chat. Is there an agency that protects social workers when it comes to proper salaries, or will even add like any unions for social workers?
Not that I'm aware of, but if you all work with me, I'm happy to create one. We are, unfortunately, our field does an appropriately amazing job advocating for clients, for pushing for solutions to social problems. And we do, of like all of the helping professions adjacent to us, and definitely other professions, we do a horrible job of advocating for the working conditions of our folks. We do a bad job at thinking about compensation. We are generally really averse to unions. We find them scary, when in fact unions are literally about collective advocacy. They do a ton, especially these days with some of the more social justice oriented bargaining for the common good oriented unions. Rutgers unions are about that. They are a key social justice tool for equalizing and improving working conditions, which then of course are the conditions under which clients get care. But we don't have it. We're not even very good at thinking about shared governance and in ways that employees across the organizational levels can be meaningfully involved in the operation of organizations. It's really disheartening, to be honest. So part of why I do this is trying to plant seeds where I want to advocate for you all in your impending searches as employees. And then I want to plant the seed for when you become employers, that you will realize there are different and more empowered ways of doing this. That is my ultimate goal here.
Awesome. And then does anyone else have any questions for Anna? If you want to put up like an icon or
icon,
chat.
raise your hand or in the chat or something.
Smoke signal, carrier pigeon. Name it.
But private consultation. I'm certainly happy, especially with current students, but even otherwise, I mean, if within reason, I'm happy to, if you want to shoot me an email. Lauren, can you stick my email? Actually, I'll just type it in there.
And then we also have a Paige with another question.
I can email it if it's easier. I don't need to waste people's time. But my other question is something I find myself doing is when I'm going on like Glassdoor and comparing social. I'm in an educational agency right now, but in a social work role. So my compensation is actually like extremely impressive compared to other social work roles I've had.
Cool. Yes, yes. Right.
But like I run into that if I'm looking up case management jobs or other like jobs in the social work field compared to, and I imagine like the medical careers similar, like social workers sometimes occupy spaces that are other field spaces, and sometimes those fields are allow you to be paid a little better.
Yes.
So I'm just like, I know I run into like the glass door quandary of like, this is what someone's being paid, but that doesn't necessarily match up to the role I'm doing. So just
Right.
any advice, like social workers occupying different spaces and preparing for that negotiation to know even
Yeah.
where and I did exactly what you said. Was I was able to talk to someone who was in my current field through networking and stuff, and that's where it was a $25,000 difference to put it in perspective.
Oh, God, yeah.
So if I
So,
was negotiating, I would have started somewhere completely different based on like what my norm is compared to what the company's norm was.
yeah. Yeah, so I talk about this a lot. I teach in the management policy specialization, and those students, when they graduate or when they're looking for jobs, it many of them, if not most, are not looking for jobs. They don't have social worker in the title, and often it's not a traditional social work organization. Like they may not have a lot of colleagues who are social workers, right? So even how they look for jobs requires a bit of a mind shift in terms of keywords, terminology. So we were talking about this in class, in planning class the other day. I suggested they fool around with idealist.org, which is one of the gazillion online job search engines, but it has a nice, it's .org, so it's nonprofit, but it has a lot of different filters, like by function of work, a kind of organizational function, as well as by social issue. And then educational level. I find it to be, I like to look for job ads just to kind of see what you all are kind of potentially facing. And it can be a nice way. So I'm getting to your question in just a second. So it can be a nice way of at least understanding how to find the jobs. And then in turn, for your issue, it requires some lateral and a little bit of vertical comparative searching, right? Where you're figuring out what the nature of the job you have is, and then pricing it out across different contexts. It may go by a different term in a different type of organization. And so figuring out what you think, like, so then going off on like literally a kind of a choose your own adventure thing, where you start with the job in mind, but then kind of see what the comparable jobs are that might be in other settings. And then if you go to New York, you'll search for New York City, even if you don't want to work there, because of the new law about requiring pay ranges, you can reliably get information on what those ranges are. So I'm not sure that's exactly answering your question, but it's a way you need to triangulate a lot to make sure that, yes, you're not, kind of boxing yourself in. There was a story years ago of, I had a student in the 90s, Deloitte and Touche was that the name of the firm? Deloitte and Touche, right? Yeah, was a consulting firm. Right? It was actively recruiting among social work schools that year in particular. They were really making a beeline. And consulting jobs, like you travel like 4 days a week. You live out of a suitcase. Your apartment is like full of old takeout containers because you're never there, and it's like your plants all die. But because of that and the kind of organizational consulting, this is around social services type stuff, it pays this crazy level. Like even Katrina, even adjusted down for recruiting social workers, it pays like back then in the 90s, it was like at least 100,000 starting for any of these folks that were being recruited. And a student of mine, she got interviewed and was asked at the interview about her desired salary. So, and she had no idea. And she wound up saying like, I mean, I admire her because she was higher than she would have been. She said like 75. And then as soon as the number popped out of her mouth, she had this sudden sense like, oh my God, this is a whole different kind of field. And I have not thought about it or asked anybody what the pay rate for this is. And she just came to my class the next morning when we were about to talk about negotiating, and was just beside herself. Like, how do I fix this? Because I've anchored way low. So she wound up she called the person back. We talked for a while. She called the interviewer back and said, after we rehearsed this a lot, said, I misspoke yesterday when you asked about salary. The amount that I would more have in mind is 90. She said 90 or 95, I think. And they wanted her, and they gave her that salary immediately, which means she probably could have gotten at least 100, probably 110 or something. Like, so anyway, long answer to your question. You need to triangulate And yes, be sure that you're considering lateral, profession jobs and maybe a little vertical as well.
Cool. And I'm gonna combine the other two questions we had from before, since they're a little bit similar. So how accurate are salaries reported on Glassdoor? And someone else, like their other question is, I'm being offered a job and I don't know if it's a good offer or not. So how do you figure out salaries as well as like, is this offer good or not?
Yeah, so I can't vouch for Glassdoor information. I have no idea. So I would just ask everyone you possibly can to try to get, maybe they know people in their network or their network, those people know people who know information about salaries. So knowing whether it's, a good offer, so my thoughts immediately go to, well, what are your goals? What information do you have about that organization and that job? So what's your target point for salary as well as your bottom line? So you need to set that for yourself and think through that yourself. But then also, while salary is vastly the most important item, it is a package. And so I can't think about how good the salary offer is out of the context of the other items. Like all of those should be on the table. Because again, if you think about health insurance, unless you don't need it, if you need to get health insurance through your employer, depending on what you're in for premium wise, or like maybe the premium's so not great, but it's like a $50 copay for every visit and you are a frequent flyer at the doctor. Whoa, suddenly the salary is really much lower value. So you totally cannot think about salary absent that. And then I would really also push for, you all should be getting employer contributions to your retirement. It is really, really important that you do that. And the earlier you start, my students have all heard me, I'm like the mama professor here. You got to start early because things you build over time. And if you defer that until your 40s, the amount you have to suddenly sock away per paycheck is enormous compared to like $5 a paycheck when you're 20 something, right? So really, and that is part of your compensation. It's called deferred compensation. So you really want to keep your eye on that prize as well.
Those are all the questions that were posted or raised.
On the dot. Oh my gosh.
The dot. Look at that. So just want to say thank you again, Anna, for taking the time to go over salary negotiation. I think it was like really helpful for everyone here, including myself. Also gonna say I posted the link to Idealist, like you mentioned, for different jobs and searching. And then we do have some more social work events, not only GSA, but through the department, that there's a link for upcoming events when you scroll down. And yeah, so thank you all for attending. This is being recorded and will be posted on the School of Social Work YouTube channel. So once we get that recording, we'll be sending that out to anyone who registered for this event. And if you weren't here last time, Dr. Haley or Anna has a resume and cover letter workshop that we did last month. That's on there as well. That was super helpful. So if you want to refer back to that, it's on the same YouTube channel.
Well, thank you all for coming, and good luck to you. Right? Take care of yourselves. This is hard, but it is so important, so worth doing, right? For you and those that come after you, for sure. So, all right. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Lauren.